In the quiet suburbs of Lafayette, Louisiana, a sense of unease settles over the community, as 19-year-old Malcolm Williams vanishes without a trace. His girlfriend Keisha Brown is frantic when Malcolm fails to return home after a night out. His phone is off, and his car is found abandoned on a deserted road. The police launch an investigation, but each new clue only leads to more questions. Behind Malcolm's disappearance lies a dark and destructive story, one that's far more terrifying than a simple romance. It's a tale of secrets, lies, and deceit that will shake the very foundations of the Brown family. Candace Brown, Kesha's mother, appears to be the perfect wife and mother. At 42, she lives with her husband, Lamar Brown, in the Lafayette suburbs, where their family is well respected in the community. Candace leads the typical life of a housewife, taking care of the home and supporting her husband, who works at a local construction company. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, Candace harbors deep feelings of dissatisfaction and longing for her lost youth. Lamar, a calm and even-tempered man, works late and is often too tired to pay attention to his wife. Their marriage, once full of love and passion, has settled into a routine, leaving Candace trapped in a cycle of emptiness. Their 18-year-old daughter, Keisha Brown, is preparing to leave for college. She's ambitious and intelligent, eagerly anticipating the new life that awaits her outside the small town. Her relationship with 19-year-old Malcolm Williams seems perfect. Malcolm is confident, a promising college student who already works part-time to save money for his future business. His charm and ambition have made him popular not just with his peers, but with Keisha's parents, who see him as a bright future for their daughter. But Malcolm has a secret, one that threatens to shatter this picture-perfect relationship. He's secretly involved with Candace, Keisha's mother. What begins as innocent flirting spirals into something much more. Candace, seeing in Malcolm the youth, passion, and energy missing from her marriage, doesn't immediately grasp where it will lead. Malcolm, on the other hand, finds himself caught in a complex and morally ambiguous relationship. This secret affair threatens not only Malcolm's relationship with Kesha, but also his entire life. Tension within the family slowly but inevitably begins to build. Malcolm, torn between his passion for Candace and his attachment to Keisha, becomes increasingly distant. He spends less time with his girlfriend, avoids discussions about the future, and even cancels planned dates. Kesha, intuitive and sensitive, starts to notice the odd changes in Malcolm's behavior. He's become withdrawn, his answers shorter, and the easygoing charm that once attracted her has faded. Meanwhile, Candace finds more and more reasons to be near Malcolm, making up excuses to see him, whether it's running into him at the store or needing help with something around the house. They meet in secret at places where no one should see them, but each time their passion becomes harder to hide. Keisha soon starts to feel that something is off. It's not just Malcolm's behavior that worries her, but her mother's strange actions as well. Candace becomes more irritable, frequently leaving the house for vague reasons and avoiding conversations with both Lamar and Kesha, claiming she's just tired. Keisha notices more and more how often her mother and Malcolm end up in the same places, and their fleeting glances grow increasingly meaningful. Suspicion begins to creep into Keisha's mind, but she can't fully accept the possibility that her mother and Malcolm could be involved with each other. As the family remains in a state of hidden tension, the secret meetings between Candace and Malcolm become increasingly risky. The tension between them, which initially was purely physical, deepens into an emotional connection and a psychological game. By deceiving both Kesha and Lamar, they realize they have risked much more than they expected. Candace and Malcolm's relationship grows more intense. Their passion starts to cloud their judgment. Candace feels more alive than she has in years, while Malcolm, despite his overwhelming guilt toward Kesha, continues to fall into her mother's manipulative web. He knows he's in too deep, and there's no way out without destroying everything he has. Each time he promises himself it will be their last meeting, but once again, he finds himself in Candace's arms, captivated by her intensity and promises. Candace, knowing Malcolm is torn between her and her daughter, begins to pressure him more. She tells him their affair is her only chance at happiness, that Lamar hasn't loved or noticed her for a long time. She convinces Malcolm that he is her salvation, her future. A descent into obsession. Candace manipulates Malcolm's fears and doubts, urging him to leave Keisha for their relationship. She believes Malcolm can only be happy with her, and becomes consumed by her obsession, no longer seeing any boundaries. However, Malcolm, feeling the rising tension, starts thinking more and more about ending things with Candace, but fears the consequences. His life is filled with too many secrets, and he begins to realize he's gone too far. A desperate search. Malcolm's disappearance has sent shockwaves through the community, and the police are racing against time to find him. The investigation has led them to the Brown family, and Candace's strange behavior has raised suspicions. She claims to know nothing about Malcolm's disappearance and insists that she hadn't seen him for several days. However, her nervousness and evasive answers have prompted the police to investigate further. A web of lies. As the police dig deeper, they begin to uncover a web of lies and deceit that surrounds the Brown family. Candace's attempts to avoid questions about her last encounter with Malcolm have only fueled their suspicions. The detectives are now focusing on the Brown family, and it's only a matter of time before they uncover the truth. A family in crisis. Keisha is in a state of panic, and her world is turned upside down. She's struggling to come to terms with Malcolm's disappearance and the possibility that her mother might be involved. Lamar, her father, is still absorbed in his work, oblivious to the crisis unfolding around him. The Brown family is on the brink of collapse, and the truth behind Malcolm's disappearance is yet to be uncovered. A sinister plot. As the investigation unfolds, details begin to emerge that no one expected. The police are starting to suspect that Malcolm's disappearance is not a typical runaway case. The young man had plans for his future and no known enemies. Yet the clues point to something much more complex and dark. The question is, what secrets is the Brown family hiding, and how far will they go to keep them buried? The police are racing against time to find Malcolm, and the Brown family is on the verge of collapse. The truth behind Malcolm's disappearance is yet to be uncovered, but one thing is certain: nothing will ever be the same again. The investigation into Malcolm's disappearance has taken a dramatic turn. The police have discovered a web of lies and deceit that surrounds the Brown family, and Candace's suspicious behavior has raised the stakes. The discovery of intimate messages between Candace and Malcolm on her phone has revealed a shocking truth. They were in a secret relationship, and it had been going on for a long time. Keisha is left stunned and heartbroken by the revelation. She realizes that her mother had been manipulating her boyfriend and may even be responsible for his disappearance. The messages contained not only intimate confessions but also evidence of their plans to keep their affair hidden from Keisha and Lamar. The truth about her mother's cruelty and manipulation has left Keisha reeling. The police have tracked down the location of the safe spot mentioned in the messages, a remote abandoned warehouse outside of town. The scene is classified as a crime scene, with signs of a struggle, broken items, blood stains on the floor, and shattered glass. Blood tests confirm that the blood belongs to Malcolm, complicating the case further. Candace, realizing her secret is on the verge of being exposed, tries to shift the blame onto Malcolm. She claims he had threatened to expose their affair to Lamar and Keisha, and that she had tried to end the relationship, but Malcolm refused and became aggressive. However, Keisha is no longer buying her mother's lies. She suspects that Candace is not just involved in Malcolm's disappearance, but may also be responsible for his death. The police are intensifying their focus on Candace, and she is desperate to erase all traces that could tie her to Malcolm's disappearance. The investigation is reaching a critical point, and it's only a matter of time before the truth is revealed. Will the police be able to uncover the evidence they need to bring Candace to justice, or will she manage to cover her tracks and escape accountability? The Brown family is on the brink of collapse. Keisha's world has been turned upside down, and she's struggling to come to terms with her mother's betrayal. Lamar, still absorbed in his work, is oblivious to the crisis unfolding around him. The family's secrets and lies have led to a tragedy, and it's unclear if they will ever be able to recover from the damage. Candace, realizing her secret is on the verge of being exposed, tries to cover her tracks by deleting all messages on her phone and destroying any evidence that might link her to Malcolm. She also gets rid of the clothes she wore on the night of his disappearance and cleans her car to remove any possible traces. However, her attempts to manipulate Keisha and convince her of her innocence fall flat, as Keisha can see through her lies. The police continue to gather evidence and their investigation reaches a critical point. They uncover security camera footage showing Candace's car leaving town the night Malcolm went missing, headed towards the abandoned warehouse where signs of a struggle and Malcolm's blood were found. The police now suspect that Candace is not only involved in Malcolm's disappearance but might also be implicated in his murder. The investigation takes a devastating turn with the discovery of Malcolm's body in the woods near the warehouse. The police confirmed that he had been brutally murdered, with evidence showing multiple blows from a blunt object inflicted in a fit of rage. This adds a new layer of cruelty and fury to the case, indicating that the killer had acted not in cold calculation, but under intense emotional strain. As the police present Candace with the facts, surveillance footage, fingerprints, and blood evidence, she realizes that her arrest is inevitable. Keisha, despite her own personal shock and grief, is torn between two powerful emotions: her love for her mother and her desire for justice for Malcolm's death. She knows she can't turn a blind eye to what had happened and that her mother had committed a terrible crime. In a final confrontation just before her arrest, Candace still tries to justify herself, claiming it was an accident and that Malcolm had threatened her. However, all the evidence points to something else. At the trial, her attempts to evade punishment crumble against the overwhelming facts. The Brown family is left in shambles, with Keisha struggling to come to terms with her mother's betrayal and the loss of her boyfriend. Lamar, still absorbed in his work, is forced to confront the reality of his wife's crimes. The trial of Candace Brown has finally come to a close and the verdict is in. Candace has been found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the verdict, and the weight of the decision was palpable. The trial was a pivotal moment in the case, providing clarity on Candace's motives and plans. Keisha's testimony was a crucial part of the trial and her bravery in speaking out against her mother was admirable. However, the trial also highlighted the devastating consequences of Candace's actions and the impact on her family. The evidence presented during the trial revealed a web of deceit and manipulation that Candace had spun. From the secret affair with Malcolm to the attempts to frame Lamar, Candace's actions were calculated and deliberate. The messages found on Keisha and Candace's phones, the bloodstains and fingerprints at the warehouse, and the autopsy report all pointed to Candace's guilt. The experts testified that the attack on Malcolm was carried out under extreme emotional stress, suggesting a crime of passion. However, Candace's defense attorney's attempt to portray her as a woman driven mad by passion and fear of losing love was undermined by her manipulative actions and lies. The jury's verdict was a guilty one, and Candace was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a sense of closure for Malcolm's family, but for Keisha, it marked the end of her former life. She felt empty, having lost both her mother and the man she loved. A new beginning. As Keisha begins to rebuild her life, she must come to terms with the fact that her mother is gone, and she will never be able to go back to the way things were before. However, she also knows that she has the strength and resilience to move forward and create a new life for herself. The trial may be over, but Keisha's journey towards healing and recovery is just beginning. A lesson learned. The case of Candace Brown serves as a reminder that the consequences of our actions can be devastating. Candace's web of deceit and manipulation ultimately led to her downfall and the loss of everything she held dear. A new chapter, a new mystery. Keisha thought she had finally found some sense of closure after the trial, but the letter she received in the mail has opened up a whole new can of worms. The words "you think you know the truth" But what happened was only the beginning sent a chill down her spine, implying that there is more to the story than she initially thought. A larger mystery. The letter suggests that the events surrounding Malcolm's murder and Candace's trial were just part of a larger mystery. Kesha is left wondering who could have written the message and what secrets are still hidden behind those words. She can't ignore this warning, and the psychological pressure she had just begun to overcome returns with full force. Kesha decides to continue investigating to uncover what secrets her family is hiding and who else might have been involved in the tragic events that destroyed her life. She begins to look into her family's past, searching for any clues that might lead her to the truth. As she digs deeper, she may uncover secrets that she never wanted to know, but she is determined to get to the bottom of it. Kesha's life is about to take another dramatic turn. She is on the brink of new revelations that will once again upend her reality, forcing her to look at everything from a different perspective. She is no longer just a victim of circumstance, but a detective searching for the truth. The question is, what will she find, and how will it change her life forever? As Kesha delves deeper into the mystery, she will also be forced to confront her own demons. She will have to come to terms with the fact that her family's dark past is a part of her own identity. She will have to learn to navigate the complex web of secrets and lies that have been hidden for so long. But in the end, she may discover a strength and resilience within herself that she never knew she had. Kesha's journey is far from over. She's about to embark on a new chapter in her life, one that will be filled with twists and turns. But she is ready to face whatever comes her way, armed with a newfound determination to uncover the truth and find justice. The question is, what will she find and how will it change her life forever? Behind the idyllic facade of the Bennett family lies a secret that threatens to destroy everything. Thomas and Emily, the seemingly perfect teenagers, have developed feelings for each other that go beyond sibling affection. Their bond, once innocent and childlike, has taken on a darker form, and they are struggling to come to terms with their emotions. Thomas, the dependable older brother, has found himself increasingly obsessed with Emily. He can't fight his feelings, and his attempts to drown them out with schoolwork and sports have only deepened his inner conflict. Emily, on the other hand, has begun to sense something unusual in Thomas's behavior. She can't understand why he has become so distant and withdrawn, and she has started to realize that her feelings for him exceed the boundaries of typical sibling affection. The siblings' secret connection has begun to alter their relationship. They are finding excuses to be alone, hiding from prying eyes, and unaware that their behavior has already begun to attract attention. Their emotions, both terrifying and magnetic, are tearing them apart from within. They can't confess their feelings to each other, nor can they break the bond that is slowly consuming them. As Thomas and Emily continue to spend more time together in secluded places, their bond grows stronger. They are on the brink of something they can no longer control, and the consequences of their relationship will be catastrophic. The woods outside town have become their sanctuary, a place where they can be together without fear of judgment. But as they venture further from home, they are also venturing further into the unknown and the darkness that lies within. The Bennett family's reputation is built on discipline, perseverance, and kindness. Robert and Sarah, the respected businessman and beloved teacher, have always been proud of their family's image. But as Thomas and Emily's secret relationship deepens, the family's reputation is put at risk. The consequences of their actions will not only destroy their own lives, but also the lives of those around them. The fate of the Bennett family hangs in the balance. Will Thomas and Emily be able to overcome their forbidden love, or will it consume them? The consequences of their actions will be catastrophic, and the family's reputation will be forever tarnished. The situation for Thomas and Emily continues to spiral out of control. Emily's feelings of guilt and shame have become overwhelming, and she is struggling to cope with the weight of their secret. She is withdrawn, distant, and disconnected from reality, and her teachers have noticed a significant change in her behavior. Thomas, on the other hand, is trying to keep himself in check, but his inner demons are gradually gaining control. He is becoming increasingly irritable and prone to aggression, and his father is starting to notice a change in his behavior. Thomas is avoiding his father, fearing that he will uncover his feelings, and is spending more and more time alone, lost in dark thoughts about what he and Emily have done. Gary, the Bennetts' neighbor and owner of a small cafe, has begun to notice the odd behavior of Thomas and Emily. He is a keen observer and has access to the smallest details of the family's life through his friendship with Robert Bennett. Gary has known the family for many years and has always admired their closeness and successes, but now something is clearly amiss. The summer of 2023 marks a turning point in the lives of Thomas and Emily. The cracks in their seemingly peaceful world are becoming increasingly apparent, and the illusion of the perfect family is on the verge of shattering. The tension is building and the moment is approaching when the truth will be revealed, exposing a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Detective Julia Harper has entered the scene, sensing that something is not quite right with the Bennett family. She has begun her own investigation, suspecting that something much darker lurks behind the facade of this perfect family. As she digs deeper, she will uncover secrets that will change everything. The Bennett family's reputation is on the line, and their downfall is imminent. The consequences of Thomas and Emily's actions will be catastrophic, and the family's image will be forever tarnished. The question is, what will happen next, and how will the Bennett family survive the fallout? The situation for Thomas and Emily continues to deteriorate. Gary, the Bennett's neighbor, has become increasingly suspicious of their behavior, and his concerns have grown to the point where he can no longer ignore them. He has reached out to Detective Julia Harper, who has decided to launch her own investigation into the Bennett family. Gary's suspicions were sparked by Thomas and Emily's frequent late-night walks in the woods, and their tense conversations in secluded spots. He noticed that their meetings were becoming more frequent and took place in locations where no one could see them. Gradually, paranoia began to take root in Gary's mind, and he couldn't stop thinking that these kids were hiding something terrible. Emily, struggling to cope with her guilt and confused feelings towards her brother, has tried to reconnect with those around her. She has started socializing more with her classmates, attempting to distract herself from her inner turmoil. However, her attempts at building connections with others have proven futile. Emily can't shake the constant feeling that her secret is about to be exposed, and this fear has destroyed any possibility of normal interaction. Emily's attempt to start a relationship with a classmate named Jason has ended in failure. Each of their meetings was filled with awkwardness and underlying anxiety, and her thoughts inevitably returned to Thomas, making it impossible to develop any relationship. Emily has completely distanced herself from Jason, which has only deepened her isolation. Thomas, seeing that Emily is trying to distance herself from him, has sunk deeper into his dark thoughts. His obsession with his sister has reached a point where he can't think about anything else. Every moment apart from her feels like losing a part of himself. These feelings have grown into a fixation that their bond is something special, something they can't allow anyone or anything to destroy. Gradually, Thomas's obsession has begun to take on darker forms, and he has started to notice that Emily is pulling away from him, triggering a panic in him. Thomas's panic has grown to the point where he can no longer control his actions. He is desperate to hold on to Emily, and his obsession with her has become all-consuming. The consequences of his actions will be devastating, and the family's reputation will be forever destroyed. The question is, what will happen next, and how will the Bennett family survive the tragedy that is about to unfold? The situation between Thomas and Emily has reached a boiling point. Thomas's aggression and jealousy have escalated, and he has become increasingly controlling and manipulative. He has convinced Emily that their bond is unique and that no one else can understand them, and he has pressured her into believing that they need to be together at any cost. Emily, trapped and fearful, has tried to seek help from her friend Lisa, but she is too ashamed and scared to reveal the truth about her situation. Thomas, on the other hand, has started making plans for a future where it's just him and Emily, and he is willing to take extreme measures to make it happen. The tension between the siblings has reached its peak, and the tragic path they are on is already set. They are entangled in their feelings and fears, and they stand on the edge of an abyss, unsure of who will make the first step towards the inevitable. As the days grow shorter, the pressure from Thomas becomes more relentless, and Emily, exhausted by guilt and helplessness, finally agrees to his plan to run away. They begin working out the details, filled with fear and uncertainty, and Thomas convinces her that the only way to preserve their bond is to leave town and start over in a place where no one knows them. The plan is risky and demands quick action. Thomas meticulously thinks through every detail, and they intend to leave as few traces as possible, ensuring that neither the police nor anyone else can find them. The question is, will they be able to escape the consequences of their actions, or will they be caught in the web of their own deceit? The situation has taken a drastic turn. Thomas's aggression and desperation have reached a boiling point, and in a fit of rage, he has pushed his father Robert down the stairs, resulting in his death. The sound of Robert's head hitting the wooden steps is a haunting reminder of the severity of the situation. Emily, shocked and terrified, is forced to come to terms with what has just happened. Her world has collapsed and she is consumed by fear. However, she instinctively knows that they have no choice but to leave immediately. She grabs Thomas's hand and with a steely determination urges him to run. Thomas, still in shock, reluctantly agrees, and they gather their belongings, leaving behind the chaos and death they have created. As they flee into the night, they are filled with fear and desperation, unsure of where they are going or what lies ahead. The night is dark, cold and damp, and they race through the streets not looking back. They are driven by a sense of urgency, knowing that if they don't keep moving, they will be caught, and things will end even worse. As they begin their frantic escape, they are shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. The date is December 10th, 2012, and their lives will never be the same again. The consequences of their actions will be catastrophic, and the path ahead of them is fraught with danger and uncertainty. The question is, where will they go and how will they survive? Will they be able to evade the law and the consequences of their actions, or will they be caught and brought to justice? The fate of Thomas and Emily hangs in the balance, and their future is uncertain. Some possible directions the story could take from here. Thomas and Emily's escape and their attempts to evade the law, the investigation into Robert's death and the search for Thomas and Emily, the psychological effects of their actions on Thomas and Emily, and how they cope with the trauma they have experienced. The consequences of their actions on their family and friends, and how they react to the news of Robert's death. The possibility of Thomas and Emily's relationship deteriorating further, and the potential for more violence and tragedy. The situation has taken a dark and desperate turn. Thomas and Emily, consumed by fear and paranoia, are struggling to cope with the consequences of their actions. They are trapped in a never-ending cycle of guilt, horror, and despair, with no escape in sight. As they flee from the law and the reality of their situation, they begin to turn on each other. Trust is broken, and every glance, every gesture seems suspicious. Emily withdraws into herself while Thomas loses control of his emotions, sinking into a pit of despair and self-destruction. Their physical condition deteriorates rapidly, with endless hours without sleep, constant fear and exhaustion taking its toll. They can barely eat, and their minds are consumed by the terror that follows them at every step. The hallucinations and visions that haunt Emily are a stark reminder of the trauma they have experienced. The scene of her father's death replays over and over in her mind, and she is tormented by the feeling of being watched and accused by her father's ghost. Thomas, too, is not immune to the madness that is consuming them. He hears his father's voice, stern and full of condemnation, echoing in his head, calling him a traitor and a murderer. The voice grows louder and more insistent, and Thomas is unable to shake it off. As the days turn into weeks, their flight becomes more chaotic and desperate. They are trapped in a living nightmare, with no escape from the horror that follows them. Their minds are torn between the desire to end it all and the fear of the inevitable reckoning. The question is, how much longer can they keep running? Will they be able to find a way to escape the guilt and the horror that haunts them, or will they succumb to the madness that is consuming them? The story is building towards a tragic conclusion, and the tension is palpable. The fate of Thomas and Emily hangs in the balance, and their future is uncertain. Thomas and Emily Bennett's escape finally came to a dramatic conclusion on December 20, 2023. After weeks of trying to stay hidden, they found refuge in an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. This house, long forgotten and deserted, became their final sanctuary, the place where their mental state reached its breaking point. Detective Linda Morris, known for her sharp mind and keen intuition, had finally tracked them down by piecing together their route through surveillance footage and witness statements. Thomas and Emily, already broken by internal horror and guilt, didn't expect to be found so soon. Morris, arriving at the scene with a team of officers, left them no chance of escape. When the police surrounded the house, Thomas and Emily didn't even try to hide. It was as if they had lost the will to live. Emily, upon seeing the detectives, broke into hysteria, screaming and begging to be left alone. She tried to convince Morris that they were innocent, that it was all some terrible misunderstanding, but her words were incoherent, full of despair and fear, which only solidified the police's belief that they were witnessing a tragic conclusion. Thomas, in contrast, seemed completely detached. He sat on the floor, unresponsive to his sister's cries and the police orders to stand up and surrender. His gaze was empty, and it appeared he had already given up inside. When they lifted him and placed handcuffs on him, he didn't even try to resist. Only a single tear rolled down his cheek as he finally met Linda Morris's eyes, realizing this was the end. After the arrest, when the police began a thorough search of the house, they discovered a small box hidden under old furniture in one of the rooms. Inside were diaries and letters that Thomas and Emily had written to each other over the past several months. These records became key evidence, revealing the dark world in which they had lived. Emily's diary was filled with entries about her internal struggle, the guilt that tore her apart, and the fear that their love would lead to disaster. She described how each day became a trial for her, how she tried to find a way out of the situation, but her feelings for her brother always overpowered her. Her letters to Thomas, full of passion and despair, reflected her helplessness in the face of this forbidden love. Thomas's writings, on the other hand, revealed a different spectrum of emotions. His diary was a testament to his growing obsession with Emily. He detailed his feelings for her, his jealousy of others who might get close to her, and his letters were laced with threats and a conviction that they couldn't live without each other, that their bond was something unique that no one could ever understand or break. These writings left no doubt that their mental states were on the brink of catastrophe. They knew their love was forbidden, but they couldn't let go of it. The diaries and letters became crucial evidence in the case, proving that Thomas and Emily were aware they were heading down a path to inevitable tragedy. These documents were presented in court and were a decisive factor in the verdict. The revelation of these writings shattered the image of the perfect Bennett family, exposing the horrific secrets that led to their downfall. The diaries were the final proof of how powerful emotions and internal conflicts could destroy even the closest of people, turning their lives into a nightmare from which there was no escape. On March 25, 2024, the judge delivered a verdict that marked the culmination of one of the most shocking trials in Springfield's history. Thomas and Emily Bennett were found guilty of the murder of their father, Robert Bennett. The trial was long and agonizing, with numerous recesses as the defense attorneys tried to present psychological evaluations, arguing that the defendant's mental state should mitigate their punishment. The judge, though considering the mental conditions of Thomas and Emily could not overlook the brutality of their crime. There was no justification they could offer to the law or society. Thomas was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, but with mandatory psychiatric supervision. Emily, whose role in the crime was seen as complicity under duress, received 20 years with the possibility of parole after 15 years, also with mandatory psychiatric treatment throughout her sentence. On the day the verdict was announced, the courtroom was silent. Thomas and Emily's eyes were dull, showing no emotion when the judge delivered the sentence. Emily quietly wept, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't say a word. Thomas, on the other hand, seemed completely detached from the proceedings, his face a mask of indifference. But inside each of them, a storm of emotions was tearing them apart. They realized they had lost everything: each other, their family, their freedom, and perhaps even themselves. After the trial, the town of Springfield would never be the same. The Bennett house, once a symbol of peace and prosperity, became a grim monument to destruction. The townspeople, shaken by the horror, began avoiding even talking about the story, as if fearing that mentioning the tragedy might awaken dormant nightmares. Local legends quickly spread throughout Springfield. Some said the Bennett house was cursed, some claimed they heard strange sounds coming from its walls at night. Others said they saw shadows in the windows, even though the house had long been abandoned. People began to believe that the Bennett tragedy had permanently scarred the place and that anyone who dared enter the house might encounter the same madness that destroyed this family. The locals, fearing they might become involved in this curse, stopped talking about the Bennett family and even avoided mentioning their name. The town sank into an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, where everyone felt that the horror of this story could touch them at any moment. After the sentencing, Thomas and Emily were sent to different prisons, isolated not only from each other, but also from the world they once knew. Their lives turned into an endless nightmare, where each day was filled with the pain of memories. Emily, in her solitary cell, suffered from constant nightmares, reliving her father's death over and over. Her mental state deteriorated, and she became increasingly withdrawn, refusing to communicate with prison psychologists. In the rare letter she wrote but never sent, Emily addressed Thomas, begging him for forgiveness and forgiving him in return. Thomas, in his cell, also found no solace. He heard his father's voice, accusing him of betrayal and destroying the family. These hallucinations became part of his daily life, and he sank deeper into the abyss of despair. Thomas barely interacted with other inmates, spending most of his time in silence, except for the rare moments when he argued out loud with someone no one else could hear. Springfield, once a peaceful and prosperous town, would never recover from this tragedy. The Bennett family story became entrenched in local folklore, serving as a grim warning to anyone who dared to ignore taboos and hide the truth. Legends of the cursed Bennett house would be passed down from generation to generation, a reminder that even the quietest and most peaceful places can harbor the darkest secrets. The townspeople no longer spoke of the story aloud, but everyone knew that the shadow of the tragedy still lingered over their homes. While Springfield eventually returned to its routine, the people knew that the horror that once befell their town could return if they allowed their dark sides to surface again. Halewood is a small town in the heart of America, nestled in greenery and morning mists. A sense of harmony prevails here, with well-kept houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and friendly neighbors who always greet each other with a smile. The town seems like it stepped straight out of a brochure, where people live in their own little paradise, far from the noise of big cities. The streets of Halewood appear quiet and safe, as if shielded from all the world's troubles. Each resident has their own secrets here, family issues, personal tragedies, or inner demons that are rarely spoken of aloud. Behind the closed doors of many homes, events unfold that must never become public knowledge. The town goes about its business, but in every home, in every family, there's something unspoken. It is this hidden world, full of untold secrets, that will set the stage for the tragedy unfolding in the Hall household. Margaret Hall, a 70-year-old resident of Halewood, is known for her kindness and generosity. She has been a widow for many years, and her only son Thomas left town long ago. The people of Halewood see Margaret as the embodiment of resilience and nobility. Her garden is always in bloom and her home radiates warmth and coziness. But behind this outward kindness lies something more. Margaret is a woman with deep inner turmoil and secrets that remain hidden from those around her. There are things in her past she prefers not to remember, but which continue to haunt her. Liam Hall, Margaret's 16-year-old grandson, recently moved in with his grandmother after a difficult period in his life. His parents divorced, and his father, unable to cope with his son's issues, sent him to Halewood, hoping that the quiet life under Margaret's care would help Liam recover. Outwardly, Liam appears to be a calm and reserved teenager, but there's something unsettling about him. His eyes, set deep beneath furrowed brows, radiate a hidden aggression. He rarely smiles and often retreats into himself, as if he's not really in Halewood, but somewhere far away, in a world of his own thoughts and fears. The first few weeks after Liam's arrival passed quietly, but soon the neighbors begin to notice strange occurrences at the Hall house. At night, sounds like screams or loud arguments can be heard coming from the house. The lights in the windows often stay on until late at night, and sometimes shadows can be seen moving through the rooms, as if someone is being pursued. These shadows unsettle the neighbors, but no one dares to speak of it openly. On the streets, Margaret and Liam behave differently. Their relationship seems odd, they often argue, and sometimes the arguments escalate into full-blown fights. But there are other moments when they seem too close to one another. Some neighbors have noticed that Liam has started showing aggression at school, has become withdrawn, and avoids socializing with his peers. With each passing week, the tension between Liam and Margaret grows, but at the same time, they begin to grow closer on a level that goes beyond normal family bonds. It starts with innocent touches and lingering glances, but gradually escalates into something more. A secret romance between grandmother and grandson becomes a reality. As the days pass, Liam becomes further entangled in a web of emotions and desires that are tearing him apart from the inside. Margaret, on the other hand, is fully aware of the forbidden nature of their relationship, but she is overwhelmed by feelings she cannot control. These hidden passions create an inner conflict in Liam, exacerbating his psychological issues. Their relationship becomes increasingly tense and unpredictable, setting the stage for the impending tragedy. It is mid-October, and the chill of early autumn begins to settle in Halewood. The trees are shedding their last leaves, and dark clouds hang low over the town, casting a gloomy atmosphere. During these days, Margaret Hall, who used to step out onto her porch every morning to water her flowers and greet the neighbors, suddenly stops appearing. Her absence becomes noticeable, especially to the close neighbors who are used to her constant presence. At first, no one thinks much of it, assuming that Margaret might be ill or has decided to rest. However, as the days pass, her disappearance begins to cause concern. At night, neighbors start to notice strange occurrences around the Hall house. The lights turn on and off at odd hours, even though no one has seen anyone enter or leave. Occasionally, shadows can be seen moving behind the curtains, but their movements are sharp and strange, almost inhuman. Strange noises like quiet screams or moans can be heard at night, terrifying the nearby residents. Some neighbors even claim to have seen a figure standing at Margaret's window, motionless as a statue, while the house is shrouded in darkness. Jennifer Marsh, a longtime friend of Margaret, is one of the few who decides to find out what's going on. She is worried and unable to calm down, especially after several days of being unable to reach her friend by phone. On one rainy evening, feeling increasingly anxious, Jennifer decides to visit Margaret's house. As she approaches the door, she feels a sense of dread, as if something heavy is weighing on her from within. Jennifer knocks on the door, but there is no answer. Finally, she tries the handle and discovers that the door is unlocked. Her heart begins to race as she pushes the door open and steps inside. The house is dimly lit, and every shadow seems threatening. As she walks down the hallway, Jennifer notices a heavy smell of dampness in the air, and something else, something rotten and repulsive. She is plagued by troubling visions, memories of the oddities she had noticed around the house in recent days. Her instincts tell her to leave, but a sense of duty compels her to go further. When Jennifer enters the living room, she is overtaken by horror. On the floor, in the middle of the room, lies Margaret's body. The room looks like it has been through a storm. Furniture is overturned, books and photographs are scattered across the floor, and the carpet is stained with blood. The walls bear crimson marks that seem to have been drawn with fingers, but that's not all. In the center of the room, strange symbols are drawn on the floor in blood. They are unlike anything Jennifer has ever seen, their shapes resembling ritualistic signs, making her even more terrified. Margaret's body is mutilated beyond recognition, with numerous cuts and wounds that suggest her death was agonizing and brutal. The shocking sight causes Jennifer to scream, a scream that pierces through the walls of the house, bringing neighbors running outside. They see Jennifer rushing out of the house, pale and gripped by panic. Soon, the police arrive. The police, used to the calm life in Halewood, are not prepared for what they find inside the Hall house. When they step inside, they are overcome with the same horror that consumed Jennifer. They immediately secure the crime scene and call in forensic experts. After examining the scene, the police realize that the murder is not random. The entire room is saturated with an atmosphere of malevolence. The police notice the same symbols that Jennifer saw and understand that this may be connected to something much more sinister than just an act of violence. It could be a ritualistic killing or the actions of someone with severe psychological disturbances. There are more questions than answers. Who could have committed such a brutal act? And what do these mysterious symbols mean? The whole town of Halewood is gripped by anxiety, but the police know that the real storm is just beginning. Following the horrifying discovery of Margaret Hall's body, the Halewood police immediately begin a thorough examination of the crime scene. Experts start their work at the murder site, meticulously documenting every detail they find. They discover several strange objects that seem out of place and even ominous in the context of a typical home. An antique amulet covered in dried blood, a stack of old photographs with the faces cut out, and charred fragments of books that appear to contain writings in an unknown language. The most disturbing discovery is a set of letters hidden in the drawer of an old desk. These letters, written in Margaret's hand, are dated several decades ago. In them, she mentions a family curse and describes terrifying visions that have haunted her since her youth. She speaks of black shadows she sees at night and hears whispers emanating from the walls of her house. These letters suggest that mental illness may have been present in the family for many years, which raises concerns for the investigators. Additionally, a journal belonging to Liam is found on one of the tables, but its pages have been torn out and scattered around the room. Only a few intact pages remain, describing strange dreams in which Liam sees his grandmother not as a kind elderly woman but as something sinister and threatening. The police begin questioning neighbors to gather information about Margaret and Liam. During conversations with Halewood residents, conflicting information emerges. Some describe Margaret as a kind and caring grandmother who led a quiet and reclusive life, taking care of her grandson after he was sent to live with her due to family problems. These neighbors believe that she was simply trying to help a boy who had found himself in a difficult situation. However, other neighbors speak of strange occurrences around the Hall house. They mention nighttime screams, strange rituals that Margaret and Liam allegedly performed in the yard, and some even claim to have seen Liam lighting fires and whispering something as he stood before them. Rumors begin to circulate that Liam was attempting to cleanse the house, possibly following some ancient rituals to expel demons or rid the home of a curse. The police begin to focus closely on Liam, who becomes the prime suspect. Psychologists brought in for the case start creating a psychological profile of him. They note that Liam grew up in an emotionally unstable environment, which was exacerbated after his move to Halewood. Even before moving to Halewood, Liam had issues with aggression and depression, as confirmed by his school records and reports from school psychologists. Particular attention is drawn to his journal, where Liam describes his dreams and fantasies. The remaining pages contain descriptions of scenes of violence and death that eerily resemble what happened to Margaret. Liam wrote about his fear of something indescribable that he sensed in his grandmother's house, and how this something gradually took over his mind. The journal also contains mentions of a black shadow that, according to him, followed him and provoked an overwhelming desire to cleanse the house. During further investigation, the police continue to gather evidence and piece together the events leading up to Margaret's murder. They are determined to uncover the truth behind the sinister symbols, the family curse, and the dark secrets that have haunted the Hall household for so long. A shocking truth emerges about the secret romantic relationship between Margaret and Liam. The police find letters exchanged between Liam and Margaret, indicating that their relationship had gone beyond normal family bonds. These letters are filled with words of love and affection, but also hint at the inner conflict, especially on Liam's part. Witnesses begin to recall that their relationship had seemed strange for some time, with Margaret and Liam spending too much time together, often holding hands in public, and their conversations sometimes appearing too personal and intimate. This connection adds a new layer to the investigation, complicating it even further. The police begin to suspect that these relationships may have been the cause of the tragedy, especially in light of Liam's mental state and inner turmoil. Investigators must now figure out how these secret feelings could have escalated into something much more sinister, leading to the brutal murder. When the police discovered Margaret Hall's diaries, it came as a real shock to everyone involved in the investigation. Initially, they expected to find the writings of a typical elderly woman, thoughts about gardening, memories of her youth, household tips. However, what they found was far from ordinary. Margaret's diaries revealed her deepest and darkest secrets. In some entries, she detailed her inner torment related to her forbidden feelings for Liam. She admitted that her love for her grandson had crossed the boundaries of normal family relations and had turned into something much more complex and frightening. In these entries, Margaret repeatedly mentioned how she struggled with these feelings, fully aware of their immorality, yet unable to control them. The diaries also contain references to strange rituals and ceremonies that Margaret conducted in hopes of cleansing Liam of evil spirits or dark forces that she believed were beginning to possess him. These writings became increasingly paranoid as Margaret delved deeper into her own fears and visions. She wrote about how shadows watched her, how voices whispered to her about impending doom, and how she felt a certain curse hanging over her family. The discovery of these diaries significantly altered the course of the investigation. Investigators realized that Margaret was on the brink of a nervous breakdown, and that her mental state may have directly influenced her actions in the final months of her life. The diaries pointed to Margaret's deep emotional attachment to Liam, which may have led to her extreme obsession with his fate and well-being. Judging by her writings, Margaret lived in constant fear of the consequences of their relationship. She was terrified that their bond might be exposed and that it would ruin their lives. This fear seemed to only strengthen her determination to protect Liam by any means necessary, even if it meant resorting to extreme measures. Simultaneously, with the analysis of Margaret's diaries, police and psychologists began to more closely examine Liam's mental state. It became clear that Liam, being a witness and participant in the strange rituals his grandmother conducted, was under her strong influence. He became increasingly withdrawn and anxious, which manifested in his behavior and conversations with friends. One of Liam's friends told the police that in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Liam increasingly spoke about feeling trapped and that his grandmother was forcing him to do things he didn't want to do. The investigation takes a new turn as a friend of Liam's comes forward, revealing that Liam had been showing signs of paranoia and hearing voices that urged him to commit violent acts. The police also discover a secret correspondence between Liam and an anonymous individual, in which Liam describes his struggle with inner demons and fears. These new revelations and evidence add to the mystery of the case, forcing investigators to search for answers to increasingly troubling and complex questions. As the trial begins, prosecutors take a firm stance, portraying Liam as a young man deeply involved in dark and dangerous practices under his grandmother's influence. They argue that Liam was not a passive victim, but knowingly participated in the rituals Margaret conducted. The prosecution presents evidence that it was this forbidden relationship and the mental disorder induced by Margaret's manipulations that led to the tragedy. Prosecutors emphasize that while Liam may have been under Margaret's control, this does not absolve him of responsibility for the crime. They describe him as an unstable young man, whose mental state gradually deteriorated to the point where he became capable of murder. The prosecution also mentions the influence of rituals and the voices that, according to Liam, incited him to violence. However, they insist that Liam acted consciously and deliberately. One of the prosecution's key points is evidence that Liam had consciously prepared for the murder. They point out that Liam had acquired the murder weapon, a knife that was later used to kill Margaret, and that forensic analysis showed that Liam's fingerprints were on the knife along with traces of blood, indicating his direct involvement in the crime. Additionally, the prosecution presents Liam's correspondence with his friend, in which he talked about his intention to change something and free himself from the pressure he was experiencing. Liam's defense, on the other hand, builds its case on proving that at the time of the crime, Liam was not aware of his actions and was entirely under his grandmother's control. Liam's attorneys bring in psychiatrists who testify about his severe mental state, claiming that Liam suffered from a serious mental disorder, making him vulnerable to Margaret's manipulations. The defense also insists that Liam was merely a tool in his grandmother's hands who, according to her diaries, suffered from her own psychological issues and used Liam to fulfill her dark plans. The defense argues that Margaret was the instigator of all the horrific events and that Liam acted under her influence, unable to control his actions. They highlight Margaret's diaries, which had been discovered by the police, as evidence that Margaret planned and controlled all of Liam's actions. The diaries describe her feelings for her grandson, her fears and paranoia, as well as the rituals she performed with Liam. Liam's attorneys maintain that Margaret's diaries prove she deliberately involved him in her rituals, manipulating his psyche and driving him to a state where he could no longer distinguish reality from his fears. After lengthy and complex debates, the presentation of numerous pieces of evidence and witness testimonies, the court reaches its verdict. The court's decision to commit Liam to mandatory treatment in a psychiatric facility rather than prison sparked mixed reactions within the community. Some believed that justice had been served, given the circumstances of the case, while others felt that Liam should have received a harsher punishment. The trial left a deep impact on the small town, shaking its sense of peace and well-being. After the verdict, the town of Halewood became divided into two opposing groups. Some residents saw Liam Hall as a victim of circumstances, a young man who had fallen prey to his grandmother's manipulations and was driven to madness. They argued that Liam needed help and support, not punishment, and that his actions were the result of mental illness, not malice. The other part of the community strongly disagreed with this view, seeing Liam as a conscious murderer who deserved severe punishment. They believed that Liam's mental state should not have excused the crime he committed, and that his mandatory treatment was too lenient a sentence for murder. In their eyes, Liam was dangerous, and they feared his return to society after treatment. This divide led to ongoing tension in Halewood, even months after the trial. Relationships between neighbors became strained, and discussions about Liam and Margaret Hall sparked numerous arguments and conflicts. The long-term consequences of the tragedy proved even more destructive, as the town once known for its tranquility and safety became a place where residents began to fear one another. An atmosphere of distrust and fear spread throughout, with rumors about Liam and his possible powers becoming part of the town's lore. People began to whisper that Liam had awakened something sinister within his psyche, a force that might continue to haunt him even after the trial. Stories emerged about strange occurrences in the house where he lived with his grandmother, including unexplained noises, cold drafts, and flickering lights in the windows, even though the house was now empty. These rumors fueled fear and mistrust, and many residents began to avoid the street where the Hall house was located. Over time, the house gained a sinister reputation, becoming a symbol of Halewood's shattered peace. Liam Hall was committed to a specialized psychiatric clinic, where his condition was closely monitored by doctors and psychiatrists. However, even in the controlled environment of inpatient treatment, his mental state remained unstable. Liam suffered from constant nightmares in which he saw visions of his grandmother, bloody rituals, and strange figures that, according to him, were guiding him. He often woke up in a cold sweat, screaming and begging to be left alone. Psychiatrists diagnosed Liam with post-traumatic stress disorder triggered by both the crime itself and the prolonged influence of his grandmother. Despite the doctor's efforts, Liam continued to insist that he heard voices urging him to return to the house where it all happened to complete something unfinished. These symptoms indicated a deep psychological disturbance, making the prospect of his full recovery increasingly doubtful. As Liam's treatment continued, it became more apparent that the question of his return to normal life remained open. Even if his mental state stabilized, whether he would be safe for society was a significant concern. The doctors acknowledged that cases like Liam's require long-term monitoring and therapy, and could not guarantee that his condition would improve enough for him to resume a normal life. Rumors about Liam continued to spread, with people talking about his mystical visions and strange occurrences in the clinic. Flickering lights in his room, sudden cold drafts, and odd shadows were reportedly seen by other patients. These rumors added even more mystery and fear around his persona, with some beginning to believe that Liam would forever be trapped in his nightmares, and that he might never fully rid himself of the demons haunting him. The residents of Halewood increasingly avoided mentioning him, preferring to leave this dark episode behind. In a small town in South Carolina, a new mystery unfolds. The entire Carter family suddenly disappears, leaving behind a trail of concern and unanswered questions. Neighbors are worried, especially since Jason has always been a pillar of the local community, a calm and respectable businessman. The story begins in a quiet suburb of South Carolina, where the Carter family lives. Jason Carter, a 45-year-old charismatic businessman, owns a successful restaurant that's popular with the locals. He is known for his sociability, professionalism, and genuine dedication to his family. Jason creates the image of the perfect husband and father, always smiling and willing to help. His business not only provides a stable income, but also earns him respect in the local community. His wife, Danielle Carter, a 38-year-old housewife, is fully focused on raising her daughter from a previous marriage, Syra. Syra, a 19-year-old college student, lives with her parents and is preparing for adult life. Over time, Danielle begins to notice that the relationship between Jason and Syra is becoming increasingly tense and unusual. Kyra, usually open and friendly, starts behaving strangely. She stops sharing her problems with her mother, becoming secretive and emotionally distant. She often comes home late at night, refuses to talk about where she's been, and spends a lot of time in her room. Jason too seems to be paying more attention to Syra than before, taking a deeper interest in her life, and defending her in arguments with Danielle. Danielle starts noticing strange glances between them, at first chalking it up to Jason being overly protective, but soon her concerns grow. One day, while cleaning Syra's room, Danielle finds some strange notes. These short messages weren't written by her daughter, but they contained intimate and disturbingly affectionate phrases. "You're the one who makes me feel alive," one of the notes said. This alarms her, but Danielle tries to convince herself it could just be teenage flirting. However, a few days later, she notices that Jason and Syra have been exchanging odd glances, creating an invisible barrier between them that makes her heart race with anxiety. For several nights in a row, Danielle couldn't sleep, consumed by thoughts of what might be happening in her home. Her mind is filled with frightening scenarios, and she starts paying closer attention to even the smallest details. Syra's solo trips, Jason's constant phone calls when she's gone, all of it intensifies her suspicions. Danielle decides to keep a closer eye on Jason and Syra's behavior, sensing that something unimaginably dark is happening within the family. One late evening, when the tension in the house becomes unbearable, Danielle decides to follow Jason and Syra. She feels she can no longer ignore the oddities in their behavior, and anxiety gnaws at her as she hides in the shadows of the hallway and watches Jason quietly head into Syra's bedroom, closing the door behind him. Around midnight, Danielle creeps up to the door and hears muffled voices. Danielle's anxiety reaches a boiling point as she overhears a conversation between Jason and Syra that fills her with dread. Sarah whispers to Jason, "We have to keep this from everyone. No one can ever find out about our secrets." Danielle freezes in shock, her mind torn apart by different scenarios. She isn't ready to believe the worst just yet, but her thoughts are consumed by the possibility that something sinister is happening behind closed doors. Despite her reservations, Danielle decides not to react immediately, convinced that she needs more solid evidence before making any accusations. However, after that night, she can't sleep, and her anxiety only intensifies as she notices more and more strange behavior between Jason and Syra. Their glances become even more secretive, and they avoid being around her at the same time. These details only heighten her anxiety, and she begins to suspect that there's something much darker between Jason and Syra than just secrets. Feeling that the situation has spiraled too far, Danielle finally decides to confront Jason. When she works up the courage to ask questions, his reaction shocks her. Jason meets her suspicions with calmness and even a hint of contempt, acting as though her accusations are absurd. He starts using psychological manipulation, telling Danielle that she's probably just tired or going through a midlife crisis, making her feel irrational. "You're just jealous of Syra because she's growing up and becoming independent," Jason says, adding that Danielle is being overly paranoid and seeing things that aren't there. His cold logic leaves her confused, and Danielle starts doubting herself. Jason twists everything so that her anxiety and suspicions seem like nothing more than jealousy and paranoia. Her attempts to discuss something more concrete only lead to greater confusion and doubt. Jason skillfully manipulates her, turning her efforts to expose him into what seem like her own psychological issues. "Do you really think I'd be stupid enough to risk our family?" He chuckles softly, looking at her with the demeanor of a man who has nothing to hide. This game starts to wear on her mind, and she becomes lost in her own suspicions, which no one else seems to acknowledge. After weeks of sleepless nights and inner turmoil, Danielle decides to dig deeper. She realizes that Jason's words can't explain her feelings, and she needs to take decisive action. One night, while Jason is working late, she decides to check his computer. After cracking his password, she finds a folder protected by another password, sparking her suspicions. Nervously trying several guesses, she finally breaks in. Inside, Danielle finds something that shatters her world. She discovers a series of photos and videos capturing horrifying scenes between Jason and Syra. These images reveal intimate interactions between them, leaving Danielle shocked and devastated. This isn't just an affair, it's a complete manipulation and control over her daughter. The videos show Jason using his role as stepfather to psychologically and physically dominate Syra. dragging her into a toxic relationship. Stunned by the discovery, Danielle can't believe her family has fallen apart to this extent. Fear and anger consume her, and she realizes that Jason has betrayed her in the most horrific way. He has turned out to be a monster, abusing her daughter in the most heinous way. In her despair, Danielle begins planning her next steps, realizing she will have to confront not only Jason, but also the dark secrets that now threaten to destroy everything she once knew. Danielle knows she can't just sit idly by, her daughter needs to be saved. Jason, the man she loved and trusted as the foundation of their family, is a predator. Danielle decides to act quickly and decisively, developing an escape plan in her mind. She envisions a night escape, fleeing with Syra under the cover of darkness, finding refuge in another town, and starting a new life. She plans everything, packs small suitcases, keeps important documents within reach, and even starts looking for a safe place where Jason won't find them. However, when Danielle shares her escape plan with Syra, her daughter's reaction alarms her. Syra responds with cold indifference, refusing to leave with her mother, questioning her plan, and even mocking her for being so naive. This shocks and frightens Danielle, who can't understand why her daughter doesn't want to break free from Jason. At that moment she realizes Syra is not as innocent as she seemed. Shortly after her failed attempt to convince Syra to escape with her, Danielle faces an even more horrifying truth. Alone with her daughter, Danielle, under pressure, decides to have an honest conversation. But what she hears shatters everything she thought she knew. Syra isn't just a victim. She willingly entered into this relationship with Jason, intending to use him for her own goals. Her plan all along was to manipulate Jason and destroy their marriage. Syra had harbored resentment against her mother for years of control and domination, and now she has taken matters into her own hands, using her affair with Jason as a tool to tear the family apart. "You thought he was playing with me? No, Mom, I'm the one playing with him," Syra says coldly, her eyes blank and icy. Danielle realizes that her daughter has long been out of control, manipulating both sides, delighting in the destruction of her mother and stepfather's relationship, all to fully control Jason and rid herself of her mother. For Danielle, this truth is the final blow. Her daughter isn't a victim, she's a participant, worse, the instigator. Everything Syra has done was calculated from the beginning. Danielle falls into despair, her mind collapsing under the weight of this realization. At that moment she understands that neither Jason nor Syra will let her survive unless she acts immediately. Horrified, Danielle realizes she's trapped in a deadly game. Jason and Syra, now acting as allies, have decided to eliminate her. In a desperate attempt to escape the city alone, Danielle moves quickly, but it's too late. Soon her life falls under the control of Jason and Syra's devious scheme. They stage a car accident, cleverly manipulating the situation to make it appear as a tragic mishap. Danielle realizes this isn't just an attempt to drive her out of their lives, it's a lethal game. In a final terrifying moment, she's caught in a trap set by her own family. Jason and Syra lure her to a meeting, promising a peaceful resolution to all their problems. Panicked and confused, Danielle decides to take the risk and shows up. However, things quickly spiral out of control. Syra, relishing the moment, toys with her mother's fears, while Jason, completely under Kyra's manipulation, prepares for the final blow. Late in the evening on a deserted forest road outside of town, the stage is set for the terrifying climax of this family conflict. Jason and Syra are confident that their plan to eliminate Danielle will go off without a hitch. They chose this isolated stretch of forest intentionally, with no witnesses, and any accident can easily be written off as a coincidence. Jason, fully under Syra's control, believes they will get away with it. But Danielle, though her mind is clouded with fear, begins to realize that this isn't just Jason's plan. The entire situation was orchestrated not by Jason, but by her daughter Syra, who has been playing both of them from the very start, manipulating their lives and emotions. Danielle suddenly sees all the signs she ignored for so long, the cold stares, the hidden smirks, the secret plots. When the car pulls over on the side of the forest road, Syra decides it's time to act. She opens the door and Jason steps out, intending to drag Danielle out by force. But unexpectedly, Danielle musters the courage to fight for her life. A physical struggle ensues, bringing months and years of betrayal to the surface in a violent confrontation. Though Jason is physically stronger, he is mentally exhausted and starts losing control of the situation. In a desperate moment, Danielle strikes back. When he lunges at her, she pushes him with all her strength. Jason loses his balance and falls, hitting his head on a rock at the edge of the road. It all happens too quickly, and his life ends in an instant. The shock of what just happened completely overwhelms Danielle. She stares at her husband's lifeless body, unable to comprehend what has just transpired. But her horror is only beginning to unfold. At that moment, she turns to Syra, hoping her daughter will finally understand that they can be free from Jason's manipulation. But her hopes are crushed when she sees the expression on Syra's face, cold, calculating, with no hint of fear or regret. Syra steps forward, already knowing how to use the situation to her advantage. She skillfully stages the scene to make it look as though Danielle killed Jason to cover up something bigger. She even screams toward an imaginary witness, pretending to protect herself from her unstable mother. Before Danielle can fully grasp what's happening, Syra tosses the weapon, which she claims Danielle used to strike Jason, to the ground and disappears into the dark woods. She heads toward the nearest highway, ready to call the police and portray herself as the innocent victim. Her plan is simple. She'll claim that her mother went mad when she discovered their affair and killed Jason in a fit of rage. When the police arrive, they find Danielle in shock, standing beside her husband's body. The scene that Syra has set looks convincing, and all the blame falls on Danielle. The police quickly arrest her, believing the version of events that Syra has presented. Syra expertly portrays herself as the innocent victim of a deranged mother who couldn't handle the jealousy and anger. Danielle, fully aware of the truth, is left trapped in a horrific nightmare. Her world has completely crumbled. She's lost her husband, her own daughter has betrayed her, and now Syra has become the true puppet master. The morning after the tragic night on the forest road, Danielle Carter finds herself at the center of a police investigation. Syra skillfully plays the victim, her tears, disheveled hair, and injured wrist painting a clear picture for the authorities. She claims that Danielle killed Jason in a jealous rage, and then tried to kill her daughter when she attempted to protect her father. The police, based on the initial evidence, quickly arrest Danielle, charging her with her husband's murder and the attempted murder of her daughter. In the early days of the investigation, the case seemed straightforward. Local media quickly pick up on the story of the jealous wife who couldn't handle learning about her husband's affair with her daughter. The story Syra presented appears credible at first glance. At the crime scene, they find the weapon with Danielle's fingerprints and signs of a struggle, further supporting Syra's version of events. Detectives Lawrence and Reed lead the investigation, initially not doubting Syra's story. But something doesn't sit right. The case seems too straightforward. Their suspicions grow as they analyze the details of Syra's statements, some aspects seeming overly theatrical, and her behavior in the days that follow doesn't align with that of a grieving daughter. The key moment comes when Lawrence and Reed decide to dig deeper into Syra's life. During a search of her room, they find an old diary tucked away among the books on her shelf. They immediately see it, unaware of the crucial discoveries that will soon unravel the truth behind the tragic events on the forest road. The diary holds the key to unraveling the truth behind the tragic events on the forest road. Written over the past few years, it details Syra's observations and thoughts which shock the detectives. She describes her gradual plan to manipulate Jason step by step until he was completely under her control. The entries reveal how she wanted to get rid of Danielle and become the sole authority in the household, controlling everything from Jason's business to the family assets. These writings prove that the relationship between Syra and Jason wasn't an accidental affair, but rather a premeditated manipulation by the daughter. She had been planning the crime for a long time, calculating that she could frame Danielle when the time came. These diaries changed the course of the investigation, and detectives Lawrence and Reed, now see a completely different picture of events. They realize Danielle was the victim of an elaborate psychological game where she had been used as a scapegoat. Further interviews with Syra's friends and acquaintances reveal even more disturbing details. It turns out Syra had been leading a double life for quite some time, controlling not only Jason but others around her, manipulating their emotions for her own benefit. Her friends recall strange stories about how Syra always got what she wanted and how easily she could get others to do her bidding. As the detectives piece together new evidence, Syra begins to realize that her plan is falling apart. She loses control of the situation, and her lies increasingly contradict the facts. Soon, the police uncover more evidence of her involvement in the crime, including text messages between Jason and Syra that confirm her influence over him and her intentions to eliminate Danielle. The detectives return to Danielle, who had been held in custody, accused of her husband's murder. When they inform her of the new findings, she finally sees a glimmer of hope. The realization that her daughter and husband had betrayed her breaks her heart. But now she knows the truth is starting to surface. The case is reclassified and Syra becomes the prime suspect while Danielle transforms from the accused into the victim of a malicious conspiracy. The trial begins on December 3, 2022 at the District Court, and it draws widespread media attention. The prosecution, led by seasoned attorney James Hammond, aims to prove that Syra Carter had orchestrated her stepfather Jason's murder, and then tried to frame her mother Danielle by manipulating both sides. On the first day of the trial, Syra continues to portray herself as the victim, claiming she had been afraid of her mother and that her actions were out of self-defense. Her lawyer attempts to build a defense based on Syra being controlled by her mother, arguing that she was too young and confused when Jason and Danielle's conflict unfolded. However, the prosecutor introduces the diaries and witness testimony that shatter the image of Syra as an innocent victim. Disturbing facts emerge in court, revealing that Syra had been planning for a long time to get rid of her mother so she could fully control Jason. Testimonies from Syra's friends who spoke about her manipulative nature bolster the prosecution's case. They recount how she had used others to achieve her goals, including her stepfather. A pivotal moment in the trial is Danielle's testimony, her statements filled with pain and heartbreak. She describes the devastation upon learning the truth and how Syra had manipulated not only Jason, but also her. Her words convinced the jury that Danielle had been the victim of a calculated plot, not the instigator of violence. On January 11, 2023, the jury delivers their verdict. Syra Carter is found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempting to frame her mother. She is sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. The verdict causes an outpouring of emotions in the courtroom. Danielle was exonerated of the murder charges, but her emotional state remained shattered. Freed from accusations, Danielle returned home, but her life would never be the same. She had lost her husband and her daughter, who had betrayed her in the cruelest way. She began the path to healing, but the deep scars left by her daughter's horrifying betrayal remained. The trial ended, but for Danielle, a new struggle had just begun, battling the inner demons and trauma left in the wake of these events. After the trial concluded in January 2023, Danielle Carter's life was forever changed. Cleared of murder charges but left emotionally devastated, she decided to leave her old home in the small Colorado town. The town was filled with memories, pain, and betrayal, and she realized that to survive, she needed to forget it all and start anew. In February 2023, Danielle moved to a small coastal town in California. In this new place, she tried to remain invisible, avoiding any social connections and living in isolation. Her days were filled with sorrow and reflection on the past, how she had failed to see the truth and save her family. Crushed by the tragedy, she became reclusive and was haunted by nightmares of her husband and those horrific moments that had changed her life. Danielle began seeing a therapist in March 2023, hoping to find clarity and a path to healing. Despite this, She couldn't shake the overwhelming guilt of not recognizing how her daughter had manipulated her and Jason. Every day, she asked herself if she could have done something differently to save her family. Therapy helped Danielle gradually regain some emotional strength, but her fear of trusting others remained. She avoided new acquaintances and preferred to work remotely to avoid social interactions. Throughout 2023, her life was filled with internal battles against the ghosts of her past, but she held on to hope that one day she would find peace. In the fall of 2023, just as Danielle thought her life was finally calming down, she received a strange letter. It arrived in November with no return address, containing only a few lines. "You thought you knew the whole truth about Jason and Syra. That was only the beginning. What you discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Someone else was pulling the strings and they didn't want you to know more. Be careful, the story isn't over." The letter shook Danielle, her heart racing as she read the words over and over again. She had been ready to close that chapter of her life, but the letter made her question whether someone else had been behind the tragedy that destroyed her family. Did Syra have accomplices? Or had someone been manipulating her as she had manipulated Jason? There were many questions and no answers. Danielle didn't know what to do next. She could ignore the letter and try to move on with her life, but her instincts told her that the story wasn't over yet. The past was catching up with her, and now she faced a choice: leave it all behind or start her own investigation to uncover the truth. Will Danielle finally close this tragic chapter of her life, or will she face new shocking revelations that will once again turn her world upside down? In a small town in Missouri, Riverdale always seemed like an oasis of tranquility and well-being. The green streets lined with neat houses and white picket fences created the atmosphere of a typical American suburb, where life flowed smoothly and predictably. The evenings here were especially quiet, only the rustling of the wind in the trees and the distant voices of neighbors disturbed the idyll. On the evening of May 15, 2014, Henry Steart, a retired police officer with over 30 years of service, was spending time at home as usual. Despite his retirement, Henry remained an active member of the local community. Henry Steart, a retired police officer with over 30 years of service, was respected for his impeccable service in the police force. He had investigated hundreds of cases and earned a reputation as an honest and incorruptible man. On the evening of May 15, 2014, Henry was enjoying his well-deserved rest, sitting in a chair on the porch of his house with a newspaper in hand and a cup of strong tea on the table beside him. The Steart home was the epitome of a cozy family hearth located on a quiet street. It stood out among the other houses with its well-kept garden and bright flowers, which were planted by Jessica, the wife of Michael, Henry's son. Her care for the house and garden was known to all the neighbors, who often came to her for advice on plant care. Jessica Steart was a model homemaker and mother of 2 children, Emma and Lucas. Her days were filled with routine chores, school meetings, shopping at the local supermarket, preparing dinners, and maintaining perfect order in the house. Her world revolved around her family, and though her life might have seemed monotonous, Jessica found satisfaction in it. Michael Steart, her husband, was a successful real estate agent known in Riverdale for his charm and ability to close the best deals. Michael often worked late, showing houses or attending business dinners. He was the one who provided for the family financially, allowing Jessica to focus on the home and children. That evening, Michael was busy as well, involved in an important meeting with potential clients, hoping to close a deal that could bring him substantial profit. It was one of those evenings when his work seemed to completely consume him, and he paid little attention to what was happening at home. Jessica, accustomed to his long working hours, didn't show any displeasure. She took care of the children, prepared dinner, and mentally planned the next day, unaware that her life was about to be turned upside down. The house was filled with the usual evening atmosphere. Emma and Lucas were playing in their room, occasionally arguing over who would get to control the video game next. Jessica occasionally checked in on them to make sure they weren't fighting and then returned to cooking dinner. She had glanced at the clock several times expecting Michael to come home, but knew that he was likely to be late again. Meanwhile, Henry remained on the porch enjoying the coolness of the spring evening. He liked watching the town slowly fall asleep, the lights in the neighboring houses gradually dimming, and the street growing quieter. He knew that his family was safe, and that feeling brought him peace. These peaceful evenings were an important ritual for him. Henry often reflected on his life, reminisced about his days in the police force, and took pride in the fact that his son Michael had built a successful career and provided for his family. Henry felt that his retirement years could be just as calm and happy as this evening, but he had no idea what secrets were hidden behind the walls of his own home. Thus began the evening that would soon lead to a chain of events that would forever change the lives of all the members of the Steart family and turn everything they thought was familiar and stable upside down. The story of the secret affair between Henry and Jessica began in the summer of 2013, when Jessica first felt that her life was becoming unbearably predictable. Her days passed in a monotonous routine, taking care of the children, keeping the house in order, and meeting with neighbors for a cup of coffee. Michael, her husband, was consumed by work, increasingly distant from the family. Their marriage, once strong and reliable, began to crack, and despite her patience and resilience, Jessica felt that she was losing herself in this closed loop. Henry, Michael's father, often visited their home, where he loved spending time with his grandchildren, telling them stories about his time in the police force, and occasionally giving Michael advice about work. One of those evenings, when Michael was once again at a client meeting, Henry stayed longer than usual. Jessica, feeling lonely, invited him to dinner and they sat in the kitchen, chatting about life. Unexpectedly, Jessica found that she felt comfortable and at ease with Henry in a way she hadn't felt with Michael in a long time. From that moment on, their relationship began to change. Henry, who had long not experienced closeness after his wife's death, found in Jessica something more than just a daughter-in-law. He saw how she suffered from loneliness, how she tried to keep her family together, and he couldn't help but admire her resilience. Jessica, in turn, saw in Henry a wise and understanding person with whom she could talk about everything that troubled her. Their first intimate encounter happened in September of that year. That evening Michael was once again working late, and the children were already asleep. Henry had come into the house after helping with some minor repairs, and they found themselves alone in the kitchen again. The conversation was warm and relaxed, but when Jessica began to clear the table, their hands accidentally touched. The moment seemed to stretch on, and neither of them hurried to break the contact. Henry, overcoming his inner doubts, touched her cheek, and Jessica, not fully understanding why, didn't pull away. That was how it all began. Their first encounter that evening was brief, but it left a deep impression on both of them. Henry, feeling a surge of youthful energy that he hadn't felt in years, thought it was a one-time incident that wouldn't happen again. But Jessica couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Her guilt mixed with a newfound desire, and she was horrified to realize that she didn't want it to end. Gradually their meetings became more frequent and more risky. They found moments when Michael was busy with work and the children were at school. At first their relationship was cautious and tentative, but over time they grew less careful, plunging into a passion that only grew stronger with each passing day. Henry felt more alive than he had in years, and Jessica, for the first time in a long time, felt wanted. However, with each meeting, their relationship became more dangerous. Both understood that if their affair were to be discovered, it would destroy not only their own lives but also the life of the entire family, but they couldn't stop. In the spring of 2014, Jessica began to notice strange things that unsettled her. It started with small things. Doors in the house that she was sure she had closed were left ajar, and sometimes she found items not where she had left them. At first she attributed it to her forgetfulness or the children's mischief. But as time went on, these small disturbances became increasingly troubling. One night, when Michael was once again late at work and the kids were already asleep, Jessica felt like someone was watching her. She looked around but saw no one. The feeling was so strong that she walked over to the window and looked out into the yard, but there was no one there either. Her heart was racing and she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. Henry, on the other hand, noticed nothing strange. He was completely absorbed in his new relationship with Jessica and felt rejuvenated. The sense of danger seemed to energize him. Henry often caught himself thinking that the risk excited him, and he savored every moment spent with Jessica, despite knowing how it could all end. But Jessica, despite her outward confidence, was starting to lose control of the situation. One day, she found the bedroom door slightly ajar even though she distinctly remembered closing it before she left. Another time, she discovered her jewelry out of place. Small earrings that she only wore on special occasions had suddenly appeared on the bedside table. At night she began having nightmares in which Michael or someone else discovered her and Henry together, and these dreams increasingly terrified her. Jessica tried not to show her anxiety to Henry, but her worry still seeped through. She began to notice that Michael was paying more attention to her actions, though he didn't show it openly. He would sometimes come home unexpectedly early, which made Jessica nervous. Her thoughts increasingly revolved around the possibility that their secret might soon be exposed. Henry, on the contrary, believed everything was under control and continued to enjoy their secret affair. But Jessica was beginning to realize that their game with fire might end in a real disaster. The evening of Friday, May 15, 2014, marked the beginning of Michael Steart's painful suspicions. He returned home earlier than usual, hoping to spend the evening with his family, but found the house empty. Jessica had taken the kids to visit a friend, leaving him alone. He decided to use the time to organize some work documents he had left at home. While searching for his business card holder, he accidentally came across Jessica's purse, carelessly left on the kitchen table. It was then he noticed a small key lying at the bottom of the bag. The key looked odd. It was old and worn, clearly not for their house, car, or office. Michael frowned, his heart beating faster. Why did Jessica have this key, and what was it for? He carefully placed it back in the purse, trying not to leave any trace of his discovery. The unease within him grew, but he decided not to confront Jessica just yet. He knew that if he asked her directly, she might lie or shut down. Instead, Michael decided to wait, observe, and look for other signs that might confirm or dispel his suspicions. Meanwhile, Jessica was becoming increasingly consumed by her thoughts, feeling that her relationship with Henry was spiraling out of control. She could no longer sleep peacefully, plagued by nightmares where her secret became known to the entire family. Michael's newfound attentiveness didn't escape her notice, and she found herself increasingly afraid of any question he might ask, any attempt he might make to look through her purse or phone. Each day, when she returned home, her heart would skip a beat. Had he found something else that might give her away? On the morning of May 28, 2014, Jessica couldn't reach Henry to arrange a meeting. Usually he would answer right away or call back, but this time his phone was turned off. She spent the entire day in anxious anticipation, checking her phone every 5 minutes, but Henry never got in touch. By evening, her anxiety had turned into panic. Jessica knew Henry wouldn't just disappear without telling her. Her mind started racing with thoughts. Had something happened? Could Michael have found out about them? Or had something happened to Henry? When Michael came home, Jessica tried her hardest to conceal her panic. Her hands trembled as she prepared dinner, and she couldn't bring herself to smile when the kids talked about their day. Michael noticed her nervousness but didn't let on, continuing to watch her every move closely. Meanwhile, Michael's suspicions continued to grow. He felt that Jessica was hiding something, but he couldn't figure out what. Henry's disappearance also alarmed him. Usually they were in frequent contact, but in recent days, his father had stopped reaching out. His phone wasn't answering either, which worried Michael even more. On June 1, 2014, after another sleepless night, Michael finally decided to take a desperate step. He remembered an old acquaintance, Thomas Grayson, a private detective known for his skill in finding people and solving the most complex cases. Michael called him and arranged a meeting at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. When they met, Michael nervously looked around, checking to make sure no one familiar was nearby. He carefully told Thomas about his suspicions, without mentioning his hunch about the affair. Michael cited Jessica's changed behavior and Henry's mysterious disappearance. He couldn't understand if these events were connected, but he felt that his wife was hiding something, and he was ready to do whatever it took to find out. Thomas agreed to take the case, promising to act quickly and quietly to avoid raising any suspicion. Michael handed him a copy of the key he had found in Jessica's purse and asked him to find out what it could unlock. From that moment on, Michael's life became a waiting game. Each morning he woke up with a heavy heart, not knowing what the new day would bring. Jessica, meanwhile, withdrew further into herself, tormented by anxiety and the fear of being exposed. She didn't know that her husband had hired a private detective, but her internal sense of danger never left her for a moment. The tension grew with each passing day, and Michael knew that soon he would learn the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. On June 12, 2014, as Michael anxiously awaited news from Thomas Grayson, the detective finally called, setting up a meeting at his office. Michael arrived with a sinking feeling, sensing that he was about to learn something that would turn his life upside down. Grayson greeted him with a serious look, getting straight to the point without unnecessary preamble. "Michael," the detective began, laying out several photographs in front of him. "I've managed to confirm your suspicions. Jessica has indeed been having an affair with Henry. These photos were taken at a motel on the outskirts of town. They've been meeting there for several months." Michael stared silently at the photos, which showed his wife and father in a state of intimate closeness, as if there was nothing between them but deep affection. But this wasn't the end. Thomas continued, pulling out another set of photos and documents from a folder. "However, there's something else you need to know. Henry was living a double life. I found evidence that he was seen in the company of local criminals. I have records of his meetings with people we've long suspected of having ties to organized crime." Michael was stunned. His father, a respected former police officer, wasn't just hiding an affair. He was involved in something far more dangerous. Thomas handed him documents showing that Henry had been meeting with known mobsters in suspicious locations like abandoned warehouses and illegal gambling dens. He was clearly involved in some sort of dealings. Michael Grayson continued. "And this might be connected to his disappearance. I can't say for sure, but everything points to Henry being in serious danger." When Michael returned home, his anger was barely contained. He found Jessica in the kitchen, busy with routine chores, but her calm demeanor only fueled his rage. He threw the photographs onto the table in front of her. "What is this, Jessica?" His voice was cold, filled with pain and betrayal. Jessica paled when she saw the photo. Her hands trembled and she tried to say something, but Michael didn't give her a chance. He demanded explanations, and finally, under pressure, she confessed. "Yes, we had an affair," she said quietly, barely holding back tears. "But Michael, I don't know where he's gone. In the past few weeks, he wasn't himself. He became secretive, nervous. He kept saying everything was under control, but I could tell something was wrong." Her confession stunned Michael, but she continued, pleading with him to believe her. "I didn't know about his connections with anyone else. He never told me about that. All I knew was that he wanted to end our affair, saying it was for the best, but he didn't explain anything." Michael could see that she was as scared as he was, but it didn't lessen his pain. He couldn't believe he had lived in a lie for so many years. One thing was clear: Henry had been playing a double game, and now Michael needed to find out exactly what was involved. With each passing day, Michael's obsession with uncovering the full truth about his father grew stronger. He started his own investigation, deciding not to rely solely on Thomas. Michael began gathering information, reviewing old records and phone conversations of Henry's that he managed to obtain through old contacts in the police. He discovered that in the past few months, Henry had withdrawn large sums of money from his accounts, something completely out of character for him. The money had disappeared without a trace. Michael also found records of Henry meeting with people linked to illegal arms and drug trafficking. Michael began to realize that his father was likely involved in serious criminal activities. This might explain his disappearance. Either he was on the run, or he had been taken care of because something had gone wrong. Over the next week, Michael delved deeper into the investigation, uncovering more and more shocking details about Henry's double life. He realized that his father might not just have been a participant, but a key player in major criminal operations. At this point, Michael could no longer trust anyone, not even Thomas. He understood that there were too many players in this story, and each one could be dangerous. But one thing was clear: Michael had to see this through and find out what really happened to Henry. June 20th, 2014. After weeks of anxious waiting, Henry suddenly returned home. It was midday and Jessica was busy preparing lunch. She heard the front door open and turned to see who had come in. To her shock, it was Henry. But something was wrong. Henry looked exhausted, his face gaunt, and his eyes were filled with tension and fear. His clothes were dirty, as if he hadn't slept or rested in days. Jessica rushed to him, overwhelmed by a mix of joy and terror, but Henry pulled away, his eyes darting around the room as if he feared someone was watching him. "Henry, where have you been? What happened to you?" she asked, trying to hide her fear. Henry didn't answer at first, then lowered his head, avoiding her gaze, and quietly said, "I've gotten into some serious trouble, Jess. I can't tell you everything, but I'm being threatened. I need time to figure out what to do next." Jessica didn't know what to think. He looked like a man who had lost all hope, and that scared her more than anything. He clearly avoided talking about where he had been, and what had happened during the weeks he was gone. Every time she tried to ask more, he evaded her questions, stumbling over his words. Jessica felt that his disappearance was linked to something far more serious than she had imagined. Late that evening, after being warned by Jessica about Henry's return, Michael decided it was time to finally get some answers. He waited until the children were asleep, and quietly left the bedroom to confront Henry in the living room. Henry was sitting on the couch, slumped over, holding a glass of whiskey. He barely noticed Michael's approach. "We need to talk," Michael began coldly as he stepped closer. Henry looked up and Michael saw fear and despair in his eyes. "What do you want to talk about?" Henry replied, trying to appear calm, but his voice betrayed him. "About what you're hiding," Michael continued, his voice growing harsher. "You disappeared for weeks," Jessica was terrified, "and now you come back and act like nothing happened. Where were you? Who were you involved with?" Henry tried to turn away, but Michael grabbed his arm, and a struggle ensued. At that moment, a flash drive fell out of Henry's pocket. Michael immediately noticed it and, pushing aside his doubts, picked up the device. "What's this?" Michael asked, holding the flash drive in front of him. Henry jumped up, trying to snatch it from Michael's hands, but Michael pulled away, his suspicions deepening. "That's none of your business, Michael. You don't understand what I'm dealing with," Henry shouted, his face pale with tension. Michael, now consumed by anger and disappointment, suddenly realized that the flash drive might contain critical information, possibly evidence Henry had gathered on someone, or worse, materials that could endanger their entire family. They began to fight, with Henry trying to retrieve the flash drive, but in the heat of the struggle, Michael accidentally pushed him, and Henry lost his balance, falling and hitting his head on the edge of the table. Blood quickly spread across the carpet and Henry lay still. Michael froze, realizing what had just happened. He hadn't meant for it to go this far, but Henry was dead. The adrenaline still coursed through his veins, but the horror was already beginning to seep into his mind. Panic gripped Michael, but he knew he had to act quickly. First, he meticulously wiped his fingerprints from every surface he might have touched, then he erased all traces of the struggle. He decided to stage the scene as a suicide, placing the flash drive back into Henry's pocket, then taking Henry's gun from the dresser drawer and putting it into the dead man's hand. Michael tried to make everything look as natural and convincing as possible, as if Henry had succumbed to the pressure and taken his own life. But even after setting the scene, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that someone would still suspect something. What worried him most, however, was the content of the flash drive. He knew it could be the key to uncovering what Henry had been involved in, but it could also become his own death sentence if the criminal syndicate Henry was tied to found out the flash drive was now in his possession. Michael hid the flash drive in a secret spot, deciding that he needed to dispose of the body first. That night, he knew only one thing: his life would never be the same. June 22, 2014, when the police arrived at the scene, Michael's initial story that Henry had fallen victim to a robbery raised suspicions among the detectives. The lead detective on the case was Sarah Hunt, who had previously worked with Henry and the police force. She immediately noticed several inconsistencies in what had occurred. Sarah's first doubts arose when she inspected the house. There were no signs of forced entry. All the valuables remained in place and Henry was found in a position that seemed too carefully staged. Although Michael insisted it was an accidental death related to a robbery, Sarah's instincts told her that something was off. Sarah couldn't help but notice that the scene looked as if it had been deliberately set up. She also noticed the physical condition of Henry. Fresh bruises on his hands and neck didn't align with how he was supposed to have taken his own life. These were signs of a struggle, indicating that someone else might have been involved in his death. She discovered his journal hidden in one of the drawers. The entries seemed disjointed at first, but soon Sarah realized that they contained coded references to meetings with someone named Johnson. These entries made it clear to Sarah that Henry was more deeply involved in criminal activity than she had initially suspected. The journal mentioned numerous meetings with Johnson, who appeared to be a key figure in the shadowy dealings Henry was involved in. These records revealed a whole layer of criminal activity, including money laundering, blackmail, and possible murders. Sarah realized that Johnson might have been the person who forced Henry into hiding and living a double life. She speculated that these connections could have led to the tragic events that unfolded at the Steart home. June 24, 2014. With each passing day, the investigation grew deeper. Detectives, including Sarah, began piecing together the events of that fateful evening. They noted the inconsistencies in Michael's story and quickly found new evidence linking him to the crime scene. One of the key pieces of evidence was the traces of his presence at the scene, which he had failed to erase. Forensic analysis found Michael's fingerprints on the weapon, completely disproving his story about Henry's suicide. Additionally, bloodstains were found in Michael's garage, which later turned out to belong to Henry, indicating an attempt to conceal the struggle. These findings led to Michael's arrest. He was taken into custody on suspicion of Henry's murder. Michael was stunned as the police handcuffed him and took him to the station for questioning. However, this was only the first step in uncovering the truth. At the same time, Sarah and her team began to suspect that Henry might not have been just a victim of a family dispute. They started digging deeper, trying to uncover the crimes that might have been hidden behind his double life and what impact they might have had on the unfolding events. The entire town was caught up in a scandal that promised to reveal shocking secrets from Henry's past. July 15, 2014, the trial of Michael Steart began with a palpable tension that could be felt in every corner of the courtroom. The prosecution presented compelling evidence they had gathered over the past few months. One of the key moments was the introduction of Henry's flash drive, which had been found in Michael's pocket on the night of the murder. The prosecutor, confident in his case, started by showing the contents of the flash drive, which turned out to be a bombshell. It contained recordings of conversations and documents that confirmed Henry's involvement in corruption schemes tied to high-ranking politicians and businessmen in the city of Riverdale. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, especially when it became clear that Henry wasn't just aware of these schemes but was actively involved in them, reaping huge financial rewards. The trial reached its climax with the appearance of an unexpected witness, Thomas "Tommy" Wilson, a former associate of Henry's who had also been involved in criminal activities. Thomas, having struck a deal with the prosecution, agreed to testify against Henry in exchange for a reduced sentence. In his testimony, Thomas revealed that Henry had planned to flee the country with stolen money that belonged to the mafia. He confirmed that Henry felt the noose tightening around his neck and was planning to exit the game using the money to start a new life abroad. Thomas also claimed that Henry had been recording incriminating evidence against his associates for blackmail purposes, making him a very dangerous man to those he was involved with. These revelations completely changed the course of the case. It now became clear that Michael might have been caught up in a game he hadn't even known existed. Although Michael was charged with Henry's murder, his actions began to appear as a desperate act of self-defense against a man who had led a double life and could have posed a threat to his family. August 5, 2014, after weeks of intense trial proceedings and deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Michael was found guilty of murder, but the judge, considering the new circumstances, decided to show leniency in sentencing. During the sentencing, the judge noted that while Michael's actions were criminal, they might have been driven by fear for his life and the lives of his family. He was sentenced to prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Meanwhile, the Riverdale police did not halt their investigation. Henry's case was only the tip of the iceberg. Now, with new evidence and testimonies, the police set their sights on uncovering the entire criminal syndicate that Henry had been a part of. Detective Sarah Hunt, who had played a key role in unraveling this network, took on the task of continuing the investigation to put an end to this criminal nightmare. August 25, 2014, after the trial, Jessica decided to sever all ties with her past life. She filed for divorce and made plans to leave Riverdale with her children, hoping to start fresh in another town. But despite her efforts to leave it all behind, the shadows of the past continued to haunt her. A few weeks after moving, Jessica received a letter from an unknown sender. The letter contained thinly veiled threats and hints that she might also be implicated in Henry's case. The fear that her new life would not be peaceful began to seep into her mind. The secret life of Henry continued to weigh on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her every move. September 1, 2014, the town of Riverdale was left reeling from everything that had happened. The Steart house had become a symbol of destruction, tragedy, and the dark secrets that had been hidden behind a facade of respectability. Rumors began to spread among the townspeople that the house was cursed. No one wanted to remember what had once seemed like a normal life but had now become a nightmare for everyone associated with the place. People started avoiding any discussion of the case, fearing that even mentioning it could draw the attention of the criminal elements that had infiltrated the very core of their community. October 15, 2014, Jessica had moved to a small town, hoping that she could forget the past. But her hopes for a peaceful life quickly crumbled. Strange calls began coming to her cell phone. A mysterious voice on the other end reminded her that Henry's case was far from closed. She was haunted by threats and hints that her new life could also be destroyed if she didn't keep quiet. Jessica realized that the past would never let her go. She understood that Henry's shadows would follow her for the rest of her life, and that she would forever be tied to the tragedy that had begun in Riverdale.